cowrie shells look like. If you know the central bank's, let's see if I can find it, the central bank sand dollar logo, let's see, picture, let's see if I can find it very quickly. Can't find it. Oh, there you go. Let's see. Hopefully you can see this, but imagine this in black and white. It's the sand dollar in the middle. Roughly, the thing with cowrie shells is that they are all roughly the same size, the same shape, the same basic outline. Right? So because there is consistency in the shape and the size of the shells, you can often use it as, and it's been used as a medium of exchange for a very long time. Right? Cowrie shells, also of course, slaves is once used as gold, as money, currency. Yeah, and slaves carry enormous value, particularly in the antebellum South of the United States. You should be very familiar, of course, with gold and silver coins as money, gemstones, for a lot of the sort of American Indians. This is the ones in the US, not the Southeast Asian kind. Stone wheels, tobaccos, bear and dog's teeth, porpoise's teeth, and of course, you should be familiar in prison, cigarettes was and still is money in most prisons in the United States. In the Bahamas, really weird thing, small cans of sweetened condensed milk was often used as money in Foxhill prison, for favors and payoffs, etc. And of course, also very popular in our prison system was minutes, phone minutes as currency. Right? Money really is anything that does what money's supposed to do. Right? Anything that performs the functions of money and is regularly used in economic transactions, we call that money. It doesn't have to be species or paper notes. Okay. So let's look at three basic functions of money, because we said money is anything that performs the functions of money. And in that case, we need to understand what are the functions of money. The first function is money as a medium of exchange. Right? So without money, all transactions have to be via the barter system. Right? And the barter system relies on what is called the double coincidence of wants. Very important. The double coincidence of want, that is, for any transactions to take place, each party to the transaction must have what the other party wants. So if I wanted shoes, but you're a farmer and you only produce corn, then you must find somebody who makes shoes but also needs corn. Right. So it makes it, when we say double coincidence of wants, I have to want what you have, and you have to want what I have in order for us to have any transactions between us. Otherwise, it can't work. Right? The way the barter economy actually works in reality is that we end up including third and fourth party individuals to our transactions. Right? So go back to our example. I am a farmer and I grow corn. I have a child, my child needs shoes. So I trade my farmer to maybe, I don't know, the guy who has some cows that he raises for meat and leather. Right? So I trade him my corn and he gives me leather. Then I trade that leather to the guy who makes shoes. And then he gives me shoes for my child. Right? Very complicated, very messy, very involved when you have the barter system. The barter system, we say, is terribly inefficient. With money as a medium of exchange, each party to transactions can exchange their output for money, which can then be used to exchange for other products and services that they may need. So if we all are agreed to convert our products to money, whatever we're calling money, and then use that common agreement, that common thing that we're calling money, and then use that to trade for everything that we want, then it solves the inefficiency of the barter system. Right? Money solves the problem of the double coincidence of wants because money is readily acceptable in exchange for goods and services. So the first function of money, or the first property of money that we're concerning ourselves with, is money as a medium of exchange. So if you want to call yourself money, first of all, you have to be able to perform this specific function. What else can we say in order for something to be money? Medium of exchange. Secondly, it must be used as a unit of account. Prices of all goods and services, particularly in a market-based economy, are quoted in terms of money. Everything that we know, when we try to put a value to it, that be expressed as value in terms of money. We don't express the value of one good in terms of another goods, right? You don't say that your laptop is worth 3.5 telephones. You know, you don't say this lesson is worth, I don't know, whatever, right? What we do, we use money as our common frame of reference. Economic transaction easier because each party to transaction, we have this common frame of reference. We convert everything to this unit of account, this single unit of account that we call money. And so in essence, I was going to use some really gross prison analogy with how much a pack of cigarettes and individual cigarettes are worth, but we're going to leave that alone. Right? And finally, for our purposes, right, although there may be other functions, the three that we're most concerned with, and the three that most precisely define money, is the third is the store of value. Ideally, money will not change in value over time. So exchanges don't have to all happen at the same time. You can sell your goods or services for money, but you don't need to spend that money immediately, because ideally, it will continue to be worth the same whenever you do decide at some point in the future to use it to acquire goods and services. So you are trading your labor for this thing that we're calling money. Right? But once you have attained the value for your labor, this money thing, you do not have to go out and spend it on goods and services right away. You can hold on to it, and at some point in the future, whether it's a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, you still expect to be able to spend this thing you call money to purchase goods and services. We do not expect money to change value over time. However, we do know for a fact that money does lose value during times of inflation. As prices go up, we expect how much goods and services that money can purchase, the purchasing power of that money, to go down. So whereas we know one of the key functions of money is as a store of value, we know it's not a perfect store of value. It's an imperfect store of value because inflation erodes the value of money over time. So your purchasing power of money falls as prices rise, as inflation goes up. Right? Nevertheless, we're saying if we're talking about the three key functions of money, one, it must act as a medium of exchange. Two, whatever this is we're talking about must be able to be used as a unit of account. And thirdly, this item, this whatever we're using for money, it must be able to perform the function of a store of value. Medium of exchange, unit of account, store of value. Those are the three key functions. There are some more obscure functions, but those are the three key functions that define whatever this is that we're calling money. All right. So then if you look at our historical list, you can see how some of these may perform these functions better than others. Right? Gold and silver coins certainly is medium of exchange, store of value. If everything is valued in terms of gold and silver coins, how much gold, how much silver this is worth, then certainly we'd also expect over time that the gold and silver coins would retain their value. So they certainly can perform the functions. Others maybe not so well. So then, what else can we talk about money? How do you go about measuring money, particularly in the Bahamian context? Because after all, that's where we live. So in the Bahamas, and this is all falls under the authority of the monetary authority, our central bank. Right? So in the Bahamas, so when we go about measuring money, so different measures of money reflect their liquidity, or how closely whatever this is that we're calling money, how easy it is with which it can be traded for goods and services. So when we're talking about money, yes, it has to perform these functions, but how quickly and easily, whatever this is that we're calling money, that we can trade that for goods and services, that allows us to define different categories or different types or different measures of money. The way we measure money in the Bahamas is how quickly whatever this is that we're calling money can be converted to goods and services. Right? So different measures of money in the Bahamas reflect their liquidity or the ease with which they can be traded for goods and services. The first measure of money, or the most liquid, is what we call M1, or base money. This is the most liquid most liquid measure of money, and consists of currency in active circulation. That is cash held by public in your wallets, your pocketbook, your purses, under your mattress, wherever you have it. Currency in active circulation, which is cash held by the public, plus demand deposits. Demand deposits are basically checking accounts of individuals and checking accounts of businesses. They're called demand deposits because at any point in time, you can, in essence, demand, quote unquote, your money back from the bank. You can write a check, you can stick your card in the ATM, and the bank is required to give you your money immediately, on demand. Right? So clearly, this form of money can be most easily converted into goods and services because one, it's either cash you already have in your wallet, or you can go to the ATM and withdraw it off immediately and spend it. So it's base money is currency in active circulation, plus demand deposits, plus reserves. Now, there are two types of reserves. And reserves, just as when we're talking about demand deposits, which are checking accounts of businesses and individuals, reserves are checking accounts of commercial banks that are held with the central bank. You have your checking account with your commercial bank has a checking account with the central bank. And in its checking account, it has two sets of monies. Right? One is called the required reserve, and one is called the excess reserves. The required reserve are money that is mandated to be held by commercial banks. Right? The Banking Laws and Bounds, in fact, the Banking Trust Company Regulations Act and the Central Bank Act together says that for every dollar that a bank takes in, as a deposit, it must hold a certain proportion of that as reserves, just in case you come in and want to withdraw money off your account. Right? There has to be enough money there for whenever you come to withdraw money off your account. Now, the banks know, and central bank knows that just because you deposit money on your bank account, you're not going to come back tomorrow and withdraw the whole thing off again. Most people don't. Right? So banks are not required to hold every single dollar that you deposit because they don't expect you to come back and withdraw every single dollar right away. Right? But the central bank requires that banks hold a certain proportion just in case. Right? And that is called the required reserves. And that is held with the central bank, and that can be in terms of just of cash, similar to cash you have on your account, or it can be in the form of what we call reserve assets. These can be Treasury bills most often, but it also can include some other government securities or public sector securities. Right? So there's required reserve, and then there are excess reserve. Excess reserves are everything above what the banks are required to hold with the central bank. So in general, when we talk about reserves being held with the central bank, banks try very hard not to hold a lot of cash with the central bank. They would rather hold it in Treasury bills, which is sort of very short-term loans from the government, right? And these are easily converted back into cash. The reason why banks don't want to hold cash with the central bank, because unlike most banks, central bank is not paying any interest on these deposits being held with the central bank. Right? In fact, central bank charges banks the privilege of holding on to this excess cash. And generally it's because the banks don't want to hold it in their own vaults, a limited amount in their own vaults for sort of day-to-day transactions, because of course, their insurance only covers a certain amount if, heaven forbid, there is some sort of robbery or something. Central bank's insurance is significantly more because central bank security involved is significantly greater. So it makes more sense to keep this money with the central bank than in your own vault. Because central bank says, okay, fine, we're happy to keep your extra money, but we're going to charge you for the privilege. Right? So not only does central bank not pay interest on these deposits, but charge the commercial banks for the privilege. So quite as you would expect, banks are unwilling to hold very much cash with the central bank, but they would rather hold that. The central bank says, we're willing to accept and hold Treasury bills in lieu of cash, because we know Treasury bills can be converted into cash within 5 minutes. So we're willing to accept that for both your required reserves and your excess reserves. And the other good thing about Treasury bills, not only it doesn't count as cash, so you don't run into that extra cost associated with trying to hold cash with the central bank, but Treasury bills also have an interest rate. It's a very small interest rate. I think right now it's about 0.5%, maybe less than 0.5%. But from the bank's perspective, when you're talking millions of dollars, that 0.5% adds up. Right? And plus 0.5% is better than nothing. And certainly 0.5% is better than having to pay central bank for the privilege of holding on to your cash. Okay. So base money is the most liquid measure of money and consists of currency in active circulation, demand deposits, and commercial bank reserves held with the central bank. As you can see, all of these are easily converted into cash, easily converted to, easily traded for goods and services. The second measure of money is broad money. The next most liquid measure is broad money, and broad money consists of everything that we just talked about in M1, plus savings deposits and Bahamian dollar fixed deposits. Now, broad money is not as liquid as base money, because ideally speaking, uh, th- they're not as easily to be able to convert to exchange for goods and services as your base money. Because think about it now, you have a fixed deposit. You cannot get access to that right away. You said, I'm gonna take out a fixed deposit. The bank says, how long? They said, okay, a year. And the bank really has every right to hold on to those funds for a year, because that was our agreement. And we agreed to pay you a higher interest rate than you would get on your savings deposit or your checking account if you pay at all. But the stipulation is that we get to hold on to this money and use it until your time is up. Now, if you have to get your money ahead of time before your 1 year is up, then you incur a penalty. And the penalty could vary. For some banks, it's just the loss of interest that you would have earned. For some banks, it's both a loss of interest and a penalty that you would pay for withdrawing your funds early. Similarly, the law on savings deposit is the same. I know you know that you can take your ATM card, stick in the ATM machine, and withdraw money off your savings account just as easily as you withdraw it off your checking account. And in fact, right now in 2021, there is no effective difference between a checking account and a savings account, except the savings account, if you're lucky, may pay a tiny amount of interest. But in terms of the use of these accounts, there is no difference. But if you've been knocking around a few years, you know there was a time when the only way you can get money off your savings account is you had a savings passbook, and you had to take that savings passbook with you to the cashier, right? And the cashier checks out your savings passbook, updates your passbook, and that's the only way. No passbook, no money. If you lost your passbook, you end up paying what, $5 or $10 depending on the bank. And you certainly could not draw any money off your account without your passport. And in fact, the way the law was written, and the law has not changed, the bank has up to 24 hours before it has to give you that money off your savings account. But of course, like I said, pretty much we have evolved in terms of banking practices to allow our customers to use savings and deposits interchangeably. And one of the things that the bank is considering, and has been considering for a while, and just hasn't pulled the trigger on it, is moving savings deposit from broad money into base money. Because if you treat it exactly the same as you treat your checking account, you use it and it is just as easy to access. What's the difference? Especially because there are some banks who, in previous times, I don't know if they still do now, would actually offer interest on checking accounts. Oh, very, very tiny interest, but interest nevertheless. So if you're offering interest on checking accounts and interest on savings account, and people are have just as easy access to both types of accounts, then what's the difference? But right now, savings deposits are still in broad money because technically they're not quite as liquid as checking accounts. So broad money, or M2, consists of everything that's in M1 plus savings deposits plus Bahamian dollar fixed deposits. Then we have M3, or overall money. This is the broadest measure of money and consists of everything in M2 plus foreign currency deposits of residents. Right? Resident individuals, both Bahamians and non-Bahamian resident individuals, and companies who are allowed to have foreign currency deposits. Those are still liquid, but nowhere near as liquid as broad money or base money, because let's say you are a resident, you have a foreign currency account, you cannot spend that foreign currency. You have to convert that to Bahamian dollars before you can spend that. So clearly, it's a much more involved process. It's still relatively quick, but nowhere near as easy as broad money and nowhere easy as base money. So the three measures of money, we have M1, which is base money, currency in active circulation, demand deposits, and checking accounts of commercial banks with the central bank. M2, which is everything that's in M1 plus savings and fixed deposits, and M3, which is everything in M2 plus foreign currency deposits of residents. Right? So what does this actually look like? Among all the data that central bank publishes, I hope you can see this. Right? This is the money supply. Right? And this one comes from Central Bank Quarterly Statistical Digest, May of last year. Right? And these are published every quarter. The most recent one would have been, this is what, June, so it'd been May 2021. Maybe I'll replace this one. But I want you to be able to see what it looks like. You see, currency in active circulation is about $336 million. You see where this is in thousands. So this is 336 million or 337 million as at the end of 2019. So this is actually cash floating around. Demand deposits, domestic banks. This is the money, the demand deposits that we are holding with commercial banks. Demand deposits here, central bank. This is the money that commercial banks are holding with the central bank. And when you add them together, we said currency in active circulation plus demand deposits and gives us our money supply, our M1, which is our base money. And the base money is about 3.2 billion. So 3.2 billion in base money. Now, when you add a savings deposit, which is about 1.6 billion, plus fixed deposits, which is another 2.4 billion, we end up with M2 of 7.3 billion. So where are we? M2 broad money of 7.3 billion. Then you add the foreign currency deposits of residents, which is another 127 million, that's plus 460, that's like 600 million. You add them all together and you end up with a total money supply, or M3, of 7.8, call it 7.9 billion. And that's the money supply, total money supply in the Bahamas. About, call it 8 billion. And like I said, this is published, this particular table is an annual table, but there are tables sort of, this is 2.7, so 2.6 and 2.8 will give you both quarterly and monthly tables. So you can see how these numbers are changing on a monthly basis. Right. So that's what the money supply looks like. Now, how do banks do what they do? Banks as financial intermediaries, even for those of us who work with banks, sometimes we don't get as clear an image of the overall process because we're focusing on our own particular activity, our own particular job, our own particular function. So let's start with the basics. Bankers bring savers and investors together. Savers are people with excess funds. Individuals and businesses with excess funds that are not used for consumption purposes. Remember last time when we talked about consumption, we said the money that we earn is either consumed on goods and services or it's saved. This is what we're talking about. Savers are people who have some extra. They paid the bills and they have some money left over. All right, so individual and businesses with excess funds that are not used for consumption purposes, we call these people savers. On the other hand, investors, and investors are not just businesses, could be individuals as well. Investors, individuals and businesses who need money. They have a shortage of funds to invest, whether you're talking in mortgages, cars, capital purchases, or other consumption items. Right? So we have savers and we have investors. Right? We can't call investors spenders because they're not all spenders. We can't call them all consumers because they're not all consumption. So we call them all investors, although some of that money certainly can go towards consumption purposes, but also for investment in real estate, mortgages, etc. Fine. Right. A typical bank's balance sheet. A lot more complicated, but we're boiling it down to its essence. Right? Assets and liabilities. If you've done any accounting classes, then you know two sides of any balance sheet. Liabilities are funds for which the bank is liable, that is, money that the bank owes, and for which the bank must make payments for the use of these funds. So as far as the bank is concerned, your checking account is a liability. You've given the bank your money, so the bank owes you that money back, ideally with interest. Savings account, similarly. Fixed deposits, same thing. You provide money to the bank. All right, these are money, and those funds, the bank is liable to return those funds with interest because the bank takes your money and makes use of your money. Right? The bank turns around and lends your money out to investors, what we just talked about in the previous slide. Right? On the other hand, the other side of the bank's balance sheets are what we call assets. These are funds that are owed to the bank and which the bank may receive payments or interest for the use of these funds. So the bank lends you money. Right? As far as the bank is concerned, that loan that they gave to you is an asset to the bank because they expect to get that money back with interest. Government securities. Government securities in the Bahamas consist of three types of instruments. There are Treasury Bills, which are very short-term government securities. In essence, it's a loan from the government. It's a loan to the government. Treasury bills can run anywhere from 31 days to 181 days. So from anywhere from a month to 6 months in length. Right. So these are very short-term loans. And mostly banks, when they purchase or acquire Treasury bills, the idea is that banks use them for cash management purposes. They don't want to hold a lot of cash for a reason that we talked about previously, less secure, keep it with the central bank ain't no advantage because you end up paying for the privilege. Right? So you buy Treasury bills so that you convert your cash into some security, and also you get a little bit of interest. So it makes sense for banks to hold on Treasury bills. The two other government securities are Bahamas government registered stock and Bahamas government stock. Traditionally, long-term loans to the government were called Bahamas government registered stock. And, oh gosh, must be about 5 years ago now, that long. The central bank has worked with the government to issue a new type of instrument that does the same purpose as the Bahamas government registered stock, but it has a new name called Bahamas government stock. Everything else is roughly the same. It's the same type of instrument. It's a long-term borrowing. Government is borrowing. So do we have it? Maybe we have it here. Let's say the government wants to borrow $200 million for whatever budgetary purposes. Right? The central bank acts as the debt agent for the government. So the Ministry of Finance, in this case, the minister or the financial secretary, will write to the central bank and said, okay, we want to borrow 200 billion. Do what you need to do to make that happen. The central bank would create a loan instrument, either a Bahamas government registered stock or more recently, a Bahamas government stock, right, which is just simply a debt instrument, and credit the government with the $200 billion because just as commercial banks have bank accounts at the central bank, the government has a bank account with the central bank. So the central bank will, in essence, put an extra line under the government's account, says, now you have an extra $200 million. Boom. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Now, the central bank will now, government has the money to do whatever it's going to do. The central bank has created this instrument and now has to try and market this instrument, to sell this instrument to the Bahamian public. Whether you're talking about individuals, businesses, institutions. So, and in essence, central bank now sells this to the Bahamian public, and anybody can buy this stuff. You can buy it for as little as $100. You can invest in government securities for as little as $100. Right? So let's say you got $100. You go on central bank website, and it has posted that central bank is offering government securities, 200 million. It says, okay, I want $100 worth of that. There's a form you fill out. You provide central bank with the information they require, and you send them, or you make arrangements to have the funds transferred to central bank. Central bank emails you back, says, okay, now we have on our books that the government owes you $100. And every 6 months, we will credit your bank account with the interest. Because in essence, you have loaned these money to the government for the government to use in whatever way it's going to use your $100, and you expect to be compensated for that. So you expect to get, and government through the central bank is agreed to pay you interest rate on your $100 of whatever the interest rate is that they've announced for that facility, for that government security. So you get every 6 months until you decide, okay, I want my whole $100 back. So you write into central bank and says, thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you've been holding on to my money. I want my money back. Central bank says, okay, fine. We just want to verify that you're who you say you are. Yeah, that looks right. Good, good, good. Okay, fine. We will send the money to your bank account. And now we've written off our books that you no longer hold $100. Government don't owe you $100 no more. Boom, end of story. We are happy. Anyway, so loans to a commercial bank are its assets. Government securities are its assets. Its required reserves, that's just money that central bank is holding on its behalf, still an asset. You don't get no interest on that asset, but it's still an asset because central bank still owes it to you whenever you need it. Excess reserves, still an asset. All right. Now, counting identity. Total assets minus total liabilities is called your net worth from any company, including banks. So in its very simplest form, a commercial bank balance sheet consists of its assets, loans, securities, and reserves, and its liabilities, its demand deposits, and the difference between the two is what they call its net worth. Net worth can be both positive and negative for obvious reasons. And we do have a note here that reserves held with the central bank doesn't pay any interest. Okay. So if that's the bank's balance sheets, well, one of the key things that banks do that is perhaps behind the scenes more than anything else is the whole process of money creation. And this is where the central bank and the commercial banks work hand in hand to increase or reduce the amount of money that banks have available to lend out to the Bahamian public. So let's start with what we mean by the money supply. The money supply is controlled entirely by the central bank. Central bank determines on an absolute basis, how much funds are available for banks to lend out. So how does this work? Let's assume that, did I pick up the right one? Okay. Let's walk our way through this. Let's say super value has sold $10,000 worth of groceries in a given day. They probably sell more than that, but let's work with 10,000. Right. So super value deposits at 10,000, in this case, into FCIB. Now, our calculation for money supply is currency in active circulation plus demand deposits. Currency in active circulation plus demand deposits. So that is the amount of money that now the bank have available to lend out. Super value deposits 10,000 into FCIB. So since we cannot assume, sorry, let me try again. Super value deposits 10,000 FCIB. So the change in the money supply where does super value get the 10,000 from? 10,000 has come from its customers. Where did the customers get the 10,000 from? Ultimately, the customers got the 10,000 either from cash that they had on hand or money from their bank accounts. Does that make sense? All right, the only money you have in the food store to spend is the cash you have on you at that point in time, or you're using your debit or credit card. Or so now that we have the retail payment service providers, same thing. Ultimately, this is money either coming in the form of cash or coming out of the bank. So whether it's cash or a check or checking or debit card or credit card or whatever, this is money that's coming out of the bank, goes to super value to pay for your groceries. Super value then turns around and deposits that same money back into the bank as its receipts for that day. So the ultimate question is, did the money supply change at all? We said the money supply is currency in active circulation plus demand deposits. Currency in active circulation plus demand deposits. Well, the cash went from your pocket to super value, from super value to the commercial bank. When you use your debit card, the money went from your account to super value, from super value to the commercial bank. All we see is the money moving from the bank, going to super value and back into the bank. Nothing would have changed at this stage in the money supply. 10,000 left the bank to pay super value, and 10,000 came back into the bank from super value. The money supply wouldn't have changed at all. So first things first, we have to understand right from the beginning that when we see a transaction like this, nothing would have changed in the money supply. Similarly, for any business, let's say you're going to Kelly's, or I don't know, I was about to say furniture, but Kelly's doesn't sell furniture. I don't know, Furniture Plus. And you buy a $10,000 dinette set. Well, money went from your account to Furniture Plus, from Furniture Plus back into the bank. And but in that case, it's in Furniture Plus bank account. So it went from your bank account to Furniture Plus bank account. Nothing changed in terms of the money supply. Right? So we start off with that, where we have a transaction, but the money supply didn't change, right? So what happens next? FCIB has, as a bank, is in a position to use that money, that 10,000, and make loans, right? And charge interest on that loan. That's how FCIB and any bank, that's how they make their money. Right? They charge interest on loans. Well, a lot of other fees as well, but we can ignore those for the moment. So FCIB makes loan to earn interest. If the required reserve ratio is 10%, the required reserve ratio is the amount of money that banks are required to hold with the central bank, or to hold on to, just in case people come back to withdraw money off their accounts. So banks are required to hold on to 10% of every dollar that comes in, or 10 cents out of every dollar. They can lend out 90 cents, but they're required to hold on to 10 cents because, all their experience and their training and your analysis have indicated that that is a reasonable amount to hold on to, because when people come in to withdraw off their account, in total, not just one individual, it's unlikely to be more than 10% in total. Right? So banks are fairly comfortable, and central bank, and it's written into their Bank and Trust Company Regulations Act. One of the ratios, they're required to hold 10% of whatever is deposited to their banks, just in case people want to withdraw. Right? So FCIB is able to make loans to earn interest. If the required reserve ratio is 10%, then FCIB can only lend out 90%, or 9,000 of that $10,000 deposit that came in. Still with me? All right. Super value deposit 10,000. FCIB can only make use of 9,000 of that 10,000 and convert that into loans. The other 1,000 they have to hold on to because Super Value or somebody else, they want to withdraw from their accounts. Fine. So because we know when persons borrow from the bank, take out a loan, the sole purpose of borrowing from a bank is to turn around and spend that money. Right? You're not going to borrow from a bank to turn around and then deposit that money right back into the bank, because interest on a loan is so much higher than any interest on a deposit. So it doesn't make sense. Fine. Let's say whoever borrowed that money from FCIB turns around and walks into Kelly's and spends that money in Kelly's. So now Kelly's has $9,000. And Kelly's turns around and deposits that $9,000 into its bank account with FCIB. So we're assuming for a moment that both Super Value and Kelly's at FCIB, it doesn't really matter, but for simplicity purposes, we put them all in the same, everybody have the same bank account. Same bank, not necessarily the same bank account. So Kelly's deposits that $9,000 back at the FCIB into their bank account. Now, let's look at the change in the money supply. Money supply, remember now, we started off with 10,000 that FCIB had available to lend out. Right. FCIB was only able to lend out 9,000 of that 10,000. Now that 9,000 came back into the banking system, right? And now FCIB can only lend out 10% of that 9,000. Remember now, they can only lend out 90% of that 9,000. whatever deposit comes in, FCIB can only lend out 90%. So when the 10,000 came in, they only could lend out 90% of that 10,000, which is 9,000. So they lend out the 9,000. The 9,000 was borrowed by somebody who used it to buy something from Kelly's. Kelly's deposited that 9,000 back into FCIB. So FCIB had originally gotten the 10,000. They lend out 9,000. Now the 9,000 comes back. Now they can lend out 8,100 of that 9,000 or 90%. So they lend out that 8,100. Again, that 8,100 is spent and eventually comes back into the banking system. 8,100 comes back into the banking system. Again, they have to hold on to 10%. They only can lend out 90%. That means they lend out 90% of 8,100 is 7,290. So they can lend out now 7,290. So think about it now. FCIB would have loaned out of the original 10,000. They loaned out 9,000 and it came back. Then they loaned out 8,100 and it came back. Then they loaned out 7,290 and it came back. And they keep this process keep going with this money going out and coming back. And in fact, out of the original 10,000, the change in the money supply is that 9,000 that came back, plus the 8,100 that came back, plus the 7,290 that came back, plus the, that's what, 72, that gives me 6,440 that came back. After that, the 64, ooh, what's my math? 64. Oh, I can't remember. Oh my goodness, that's bad. I'm sure if you have a calculator, you can work on the numbers. It's 10% each time or 90% each time. When you add that all up, that comes to exactly $100,000. So when we add everything up, so we're looking at the total change in the money supply. So the total change in our cash plus the total change in demand deposits. Oops. Think about this. What we've started off with 10,000, our original deposit. And we have used that 10,000 and we have lent out 90% of that each time that money went through the banking system, through our economy. We lent out 90%, 90%, 90%. And when we add all those up, we end up finding that we have, in essence, lent out $100,000 in total. So the banks initially got in $10,000 deposit and converted that $10,000 deposit into a total of $100,000 worth of loans. Okay? A 10-to-1 ratio. But in essence, that's exactly what we were talking about last class, where we talked about a $1 change in one of these spending and how much that changes into total GDP. In this case, we saw a $10,000 deposit change into $100,000 worth of loans, or what we call the money supply, money available for banks to lend out. Okay? And that's when we talk about a multiplier, that's what we're talking about. All right. All of this is to lead us up to how we go about actually using the money multiplier. The money multiplier, by definition, and folks, I have 7 o'clock. I may have to, anyway, we'll see. We'll see. The money multiplier is defined the same way we define the other multipliers. The money multiplier is the ratio of changes in demand deposits to changes in the money supply. You may see the money multiplier often may be written as the deposit multiplier or the deposit expansion multiplier. It all means exactly the same thing. It says because what we saw previously, we saw a change in demand deposits of 10,000. That was the original deposits from SuperValue. The super value, when it sold groceries, it deposits that 10,000 into its checking account. So we saw a $10,000 change in demand deposits change into $100,000 worth in money, in the money supply. $100,000 change in the money supply, that's what the bank was able to lend out. Right? So in that case, that was a 10-to-1 ratio, or a multiplier of 10, because that multiplier says that a $1 change in the demand deposit resulted in a $10 increase in the money supply, and a $10,000 increase in demand deposits resulted in a $100,000 increase in the money supply. You would have known from our previous multiplier that we said change in GDP, right, equals the multiplier times the change in whatever one of our variables we're looking at, whether we're talking with C or I or G or T for taxes. Similarly, total change in the money supply, so rather than total change in GDP, this is total change in money supply, would equal the money multiplier times the change in demand deposits. Total change in money supply would be the money multiplier times the change in demand deposits. Okay, let's work our way through an example, same way we did with the other multipliers. So let's assume for a moment that central bank employs one of its monetary tools. In this case, they sell government. That should be buy, my apologies. I hope your note says the same. Right. Assume that a central bank employs one of its monetary tools. Right? And one of the tools central bank has, it can either buy or sell government bonds, BGS or BGRS, to the commercial banks, or buy them from the commercial banks. Think about this. We know that the commercial banks don't want to hold on to a ton of cash because there's no money to be made hanging on to cash. And if you deposit that cash, they don't want to keep any large amount of cash on their premises and their faults because of the insurance. And they don't want to keep it with the central bank because even though central bank has bigger insurance and more secure, central bank is charging them for the privilege. So they always want to be able to convert that cash into government securities and get the interest rate and the security of investing in government securities. Right? So commercial banks typically would use their cash and buy government securities from the central bank and tell the central bank, okay, you hold on to these securities as part of my reserves, my required reserves. So you don't have to hold on to my cash as part of required reserve. You can hold on to these government securities as reserves, as my required reserves. Right? Central banks happy to do so, commercial banks, everybody's happy. Fine. Now, when central bank buys government bonds from commercial banks, so commercial banks are holding on to these government bonds instead of cash. So if central bank can buy these government bonds from the commercial banks, the central bank then credits the commercial bank's bank accounts with the cash. So let's say we're back to FCIB, for example, right? And central bank buys $130 million worth of government bonds from FCIB or the entire banking system. Central bank credits now these people's bank accounts, the commercial bank's bank accounts, with $130 million. So now they have $130 million in cash sitting on their bank accounts with the central bank that they didn't have before. Well, that ain't a good thing. Because they don't want the cash sitting on their bank account with central bank because one, the cash is not earning any money for them. And two, central bank is charging them for the privilege of securing their money. All right. So once that happens, then the banks are now encouraged to do the only thing they could do. Take that $130 million in cash and make loans. So typically, when central bank puts additional money in the hands of the banks, that's what we mean. The central bank will in fact buy these bonds back from the commercial banks and deposits the cash into their bank accounts. Banks now have all this excess cash sitting in their bank accounts. They can turn around and make loans. So as soon as the central bank employs one of its monetary tools to buy government bonds from commercial banks, this leads to an increase in loanable funds or deposits in the banking system. Right? All this means this is money sitting in the commercial bank's bank accounts with the central bank, 130 million. Now, if we assume, that should be 10%. Okay. Let us also assume a required reserve ratio, in this case, of 1%. All right. So a required reserve ratio of 1% says that out of every dollar that you take in as a commercial bank, you can lend out $99 and you only have to hold back $1. Right? Because $1 is 1% of $100. So a required reserve ratio of 1% says that you can lend out $99, but you have to keep $1 back, 1%. Our money multiplier, here it is up top. Our money multiplier is 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. Our money multiplier is 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. If you remember our fiscal multiplier, for example, our consumption multiplier was what? 1 over 1 minus MPC. But in this case, our money multiplier is 1 divided by the required reserve ratio. So if we assume the required reserve ratio is 1%, then our multiplier is 1 divided by 0.01, because that's 1%. If you are not sure, all right, let's say you want to know what's 15%. Right? If you take that 15 and you divide it by 100, that tells you it is 0.15. Right. If you have 20% and you want to know what that is as a decimal, you divide by 100, it becomes 0.20. Right? In our case, 1%, if you divide, so far, 1%, if you divide that by 100, you get 0.01. All right? Use your calculator, please, please, please. So 1 divided by 0.01. Where's my calculator? 1 divided by 0.01. Sorry. And I end up with 100. I'm assuming you got the same thing on your calculator.
Yes, sir.
So we end up with a multiplier of 100. And then we use a similar formula that we did when we were doing GDP. So we said the change in money supply is your multiplier times, in this case, the change in the demand deposits. So it's 100 multiply. We worked on the multiplier to be 100. And we said whatever central bank did, it ended up having an additional $130 million going into the commercial bank's bank accounts. The result is the multiplier went up by 1,300 million, or 1.3 billion. All right. Let's say central bank employs one of its monetary tools. In this case, it sells government bonds. Sells government bonds to the commercial banks. If central bank were to sell these bonds to the commercial banks, does that increase or reduce the amount of money that banks have available to lend out? Think about this now. If I were to sell you a car, do you now have more or less money in your bank account at the end of this transaction?
Less.
Because you now have the car and I got the money. So similarly, if the central bank were to sell government bonds to commercial banks, this would lead to a decrease in loanable funds in the banking system. And let's say that increase in loanable funds was 55 million. Whatever central bank did when it sold when it sells these government bonds to commercial banks paid for these bonds with cash out of its bank accounts that the central bank is holding. The result is that banks have less money to lend out. So if banks have less money to lend out, you would expect the total amount of money supply would go down. Right? So let's say the central bank sells bonds to commercial banks, which lead to a decrease in loanable funds of 55 million. In addition, let's assume a required reserve ratio of 5%. That means when we divide that by 100, we end up at 0.05. So far, so good. Now, we said to find out how much money supply changes, that's this thing here, we need the money multiplier and we need change in demand deposits. So the money multiplier, we said, is 1 divided by our required reserve ratio. Right? And the question tells us that our required reserve ratio is 5% or 0.05. So we end up with 1 divided by 0.05. And what's 1 divided by 0.05? Somebody?
20.
Anybody? Thank you very much. Okay, so now we just plug everything into our formula. Our formula says the change in the money supply is our money multiplier, which we worked out to be 20, times our change in demand deposits, which central bank changes it costs to 55. All right, and what's 55 times 20?
1.1.
Sorry?
1.1 million.
I don't understand. Is it 1?
100. 100,000. 1,100,000.
That 1,100,000?
Yes.
That can't be right. We started with 55 million. So 55 million. Oh, this is 1.1 billion.
1.1 billion.
Okay. You're trying to trick me. All right. Or 1,100 million.
Right.
So that's the idea. It's not terribly complicated, right? You would have done multipliers in your last homework, right? And all we're saying is that we're applying the multiplier to the banking system. Hang on, folks, where's my, where's my macroeconomic 2021? And I'm missing something, folks. Give me 1 second. Oh, I need to apologize to you guys. I had created some additional notes. And I don't think I saved it. It's not nice.
That's okay. You can take it off the exam. You
I'm
still
trying
have
to think.
time.
No, I'm trying to think if this, fine. Yeah, I had some notes on the organization of the banking sector in the Bahamas. Yeah, I'll look at your exam and see. It's probably just a question or two in the definitions.
More like 3.
No, it's not 3 because you know. Yeah, okay, I can make some adjustments. All right.
Thank you.
Any questions? I'm not going to go further than because it doesn't make sense, and I don't want to introduce something new come Wednesday. Yeah, I would rather any questions that you may have. I don't have a prescribed review program. I would want any questions, anything you're not quite comfortable with, anything you want me to go over, I'm happy to do so. But if you're happy, I'm happy, and we could all work towards next week, Monday. Unless, of course, you guys feeling really funky and want to do an exam on Wednesday, I'm happy with that too. But I guess not. Just, I think there's still a homework or two outstanding. All right. All I really wanted to do today is make sure we had an understanding of the banking system and the way money is created and our definitions of money. So I am happy to entertain any questions about this, the work up to this point.
Sorry, Mr. Demaris. Will
Yes,
the
ma'am.
exam questions be multiple choice based, or they'll actually be?
The exam will be 3 parts, well, 3 types of questions. You're going to have a series, I think, given the adjustments I have to make now, 20, maybe 20 multiple choice definition questions like what you saw on the midterm. Then you have your quantitative questions. This is your demand and supply. I'll pull up the exam on Wednesday. I'm not going to let you see the exam, but so I could get the precise. Anyway, there are 3 sections, all on calculations, all on quantitative, including your demand and supply, your GDP, and your employment. All right, those calculations are not multiple choice. You would do them in your exam books, and they are either these are partial credit questions. Yeah, so let me stop this because I don't think I need this anymore. All right. So what we're saying is that it's possible to get partial credit for those questions as opposed to the way it was on the multiple choice exam where it's either fully right or fully wrong. All right. And the third part is, then there's the short answers. I don't want to call it essay because it's not really essay, more short answers. These are going to cover things like making sure that we have a better understanding of the short run production function, the policy questions. Right. And there is going to be some quantitative policy questions like calculating change in GDP and change in money supply. And there is 3. Yes. 3 medium answer questions where I give you 3 questions, you pick one, and you basically give me a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, to show that you understand what's going on. I think that's it. So in total, the exam has 45 questions. So multiple choice, a lot of quantitative questions, and some short answers. Anything else? No?
The latter question, Mr. Demerit, will you be able to do an example of that on Wednesday?
I wasn't planning to. I suppose. I'm spoiling y'all, hey. Okay, fine, whatever, fine. Stop begging.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So we're good? Yeah, I shortchanged you guys. It's only 7:20. Yeah, but I could do new notes on Wednesday. But that'll be nice. I wouldn't be nice. Anyway, so if no other questions, I'll let you guys off early tonight. And we will go through the type of questions that you see on the exam. We'll go through those on Wednesday. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, folks. Y'all have a good evening.
Okay, good evening.
Good night.